know, it just goes to show like technology is hard even for us, right? We've been doing this for a long time. And
Yeah.
this morning we're running into our own sets of issues. I mean, I thought that was interesting. I'm not going to share what just happened because that's
No,
like,
you can share it. You can share it. Let's talk about how technically incompetent I am for a moment.
yeah, and
Um,
it's just it goes to show this exact thing here is that it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this, we still goof up, things still happen. I thought it was, you know, I'm over here. Okay, so first of all, that's on me. I'm over here trying to record with a different like provider this morning, right? A different service. Issues there, and then we switch back over to Zoom. Here we are,
yeah.
and we're like, "Can you hear me?" That whole thing, and
And I'm wearing the wrong headphones. So for everybody that's listening, we moved over to a new provider. We didn't test it ahead of time. Kind of like we'll do it live. That's
yeah,
okay. That happens. And it turns out that I don't have any of the technical capabilities to use that platform at the moment. So I tried to download the app on my phone, thinking I would be able to do it on my phone. But for some reason, I couldn't paste the link in. But I still had my headphones in on the phone because that's where we were going to record. And then you sent the Zoom link. And I clicked the Zoom link. I opened up Zoom. I did not change from my phone to my computer's headphones. And so I'm sitting here like, why can't Ram hear me? Even though the reason is pretty obvious, is that I'm wearing the wrong headphones.
yeah.
You know,
It's
fun
like
times.
it's like testing in production, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I thought this, this happens all the time. I know sometimes I'll be teaching something that we kind of started back again with Kojin. I'll be teaching, and then you're like, "Why doesn't this work? I just tested this like 2 days ago."
Yeah.
And I always tell people, I said, JavaScript, and not only JavaScript, but JavaScript will make you look like a fool at the most inopportune time. You're like, oh, this should work. And then all of a sudden it's like, it doesn't work. I remember that happening to me quite a bit.
Yeah.
You do like a live demo, and all of a sudden everything blows up, and you're like, I swear this works. In any other situation, this works, but it's just because we're live. The demo flag is on or something, and making me look like a fool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that happened to me even just when the last coach gym session. Is that last weekend?
It was last
uh
weekend.
yeah, when we were doing Express, there were some things that like I had done like 2 days before. And then when I tried to do it in the demo session, like it's like not working all of a sudden. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I don't know why that's working. And at that point, like you kind of have two choices, right? Like I think I prefer to just say, like, well, that's not working, let's move on. But like I remember in the past, like if it didn't work, like you'd spend all this time
Mm-hmm.
or I would spend all this time like trying to get it to work to show them like, oh, it used to work. And I'm like, oh, I mean, I think it's kind of what you were saying, like, but like just knowing that JavaScript's going to make you look like a fool sometimes. And
Yeah.
like, oh, whatever, it's not working, that's fine.
Yeah. It's also wasted a lot of time for me too. I was it reminded me, there was a one of the comments, one of the guys in our Discord server was like, hey, his IntelliJ, his like things aren't loading or something. And sometimes all you've got to do is like turn it on and off again, right? That kind of
Yeah.
thing, or turn off and on again. Like sometimes that is the solution. So
Right.
I'll reboot my machine, clear all my cache, sometimes these sessions are stale. And but there is something that like we've seen this uh in the Discord server. Like one of the common things is we're talking about like interviews.
Hmm.
um Kind of going to repeat something here. We know that the market is super rough, and then one of the things that always irks me is we know that the market is terrible,
Hmm.
and then people put all this effort into their resumes and all this stuff, and then they get to the interview and they haven't done any prep work
Right.
for the interview. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you put all this work in because so first of all, looking for a job is hard. It's a full-time job and then
Yeah.
some. You're like
Yeah.
redoing your resume. Sometimes you're tailoring your resume many times over for a specific job, and then for that job, so because you don't want it to be too bland, you want it to be kind of specific. Sometimes they'll ask for cover letters. I don't really like them, but sometimes I'll do them because somebody might read them, right? And I'm trying to appeal to them. So lots of work goes into this.
Yeah.
And then somebody gets an interview and it's like, all right, awesome, what work have you done to prepare for this? And it's like little to none.
Yeah.
And that's extremely frustrating. So I wanted to talk with a little bit of time that we had. Again, technical difficulties up front limit the time that we actually have,
Yeah.
but I think we can do this. And then we can always come back to it later. But interview tips. So I'll start with you, Randy, because I know I have a couple that are really important to me and have worked for me.
Yeah.
over and over and over again, right? But let's just say that you were interviewing today, right? Hypothetically, we know you're not interviewing today, but let's say that you were, what are some of the tips that you would give?
Yeah, I think before I go into an interview, one of the things that I do, and it kind of is a part of that whole resume process, is I try to decide like what's my like 3 second or 30 second like elevator pitch? What is it that I'm trying to bring to an organization in my next role? Like what is the value proposition that I want to sell? And and then why that's so important to me is that I'll capture that right at the start. And then I'll do a bunch of interviews where I won't get past the first interview because I'm sort of refining that 30-second pitch. This is not unlike marketing, right? Or a go-to-market, is you've got to find your market fit. So you refine your pitch, and or I refine my pitch, and basically I'm trying to find out like what is the value proposition that sticks in the market right now, and that I feel like I can set clear expectations around and accomplish and provide that value. So I do that. And then as I go into each interview, I sort of just sit down and say like, okay, how is that value proposition represented in this interview? Like, what is it that I'm trying to communicate to them? And honestly, then this is where it kind of gets a bit like, I'll say soft, but once I know what I want to say, all I'm really looking for in the interview is no matter what question they're asking, I'm asking, how can I tie that back to what I want to say? Like how can I take the question that they asked and communicate the value proposition that I want to communicate in a way that it answers their question by saying like, here's the value that I provide. So if I come in and they ask me something like, can you tell me about a time when you had to balance product and technical needs? That's a common question that gets asked in an interview. And like my proposition is that I want to solve problems for customers, right? And so then I'll talk about like the way that I focus technology on delivering value to customers as a primary initiative, and as a sort of secondary or sort of tangential or isomorphic part of that is delivering technology with quality so that we can continue to iterate. Or whatever. I don't know. I'm kind of making this up right now on the spot. But like that's the real
Sounds
core
good.
of it. And like I mean, no, but once you know your value proposition, that's really what it's all about to me. It's like, okay, I know what my value proposition is. They have a question that they're asking me. And like I'm going to answer that question kind of, but more important than answering their question is communicating my value, because I want them to know that that's the thing I'm bringing to the table. And that way we both are kind of clear-eyed about like what I do in an organization. And if that's a good fit for the organization, then I'm a good fit. And if it's not, I'm not. And like, that's the other thing that I think, like when you talk about tips is like, I've sort of learned to not sweat rejection. Like if they're like, oh, we're not going to move forward, we're going to go in a different direction, especially because I've allowed myself to kind of set these boundaries around like, I'm coming and telling you what I do as an organization, not you telling me what you want me to do. So if they
Right.
don't want me to do that thing, like, okay, cool. Like I'm not sad about that. We both had an opportunity to say, like, do we need this thing? And they said no. And that's okay. Like that's not a rejection to me. That's like saying like we don't need that value in our organization right now. So I think those are the two big ones, is to really understand my value proposition and how I can communicate that like every step of the way. Resume, you know, the sort of phone screen, the technical interview, and even like I usually have to like at this point, like you have to do like these leadership panels, which are like panel discussions with the executive leadership team or whatever. And how do I communicate that value? Like it's been a while since I've interviewed, um, but at my last interviewing round, which was in February or so of last year, the thing that I decided that I really wanted to communicate is that I like scale organizations by building trust, not technology, but trust. I build things that systems that engineers can trust. I build trust networks like in communication, and that's how we scale the organization. And so that was like the core driver. Everybody I talked about how I build trust in an organization, how I build trust in an organization. Nobody was asking me about trust. Nobody asked like, how do you build trust in an organization? And that's important to understand. Is that like nobody's going to like softball you the question you want to answer. You kind of they ask you questions like, how do you balance product and technical needs? And I talk about how I build strong communication between product and technology and iterate on a solution to ensure that we all trust that we're going to reach the destination with not only the right solution, but the right implementation. And that's like, and that we're just talking about trust. And so I think a lot about that. And then the other one is like, if somebody's like, oh, well, we trust each other pretty good, we don't need somebody to come in and build trust in our systems and in our people, then they may pass on me, and that's okay.
I think there's there's a couple key things that I can pull out of what you just mentioned. And first is that first of all, like if you were interviewing today, you'd be interviewing for like director level positions or like a C-suite position, maybe like a CTO. Like ideally, I think that's where you are, not necessarily where you're going, but that's where you are. I mean, especially with the stuff that we've done, and potentially a CEO, right? And so if anybody's listening to this, you might be saying, man, well, Randy's at a different level than me, and so it's different. And I'd say that that's not really true, because you can still go in, even if you're a entry level engineer, you can still go in and say, okay, what's my value proposition? Because that's ultimately what you're doing, is whether you like it or not. I'm gonna come. I wrote a LinkedIn post on this not too long ago. Hey, and it ties back to a previous podcast episode, which is you have to understand the game you're playing.
Yeah.
And goes back to like what something that Simon Sinek always talks about, is you have to understand the game you're playing, whether you like it or not. This is a game, or the game of life, the game of having a career, right? You have to play the game, unfortunately, or you go start your own company. Like that's really the truth of it. If you don't like playing the game, you got to go start your own company. But if you're not able to go start your own company, guess what? You got to understand the game that we're all playing, and then you got to learn to play it, because the people that play it really well are the ones that get multiple interviews and they get multiple offers. And they're very successful in this phase, right? Which is interviewing, the pre-job step. And then they're successful in the job. But what I'm coming back to is, you talked about like your elevator pitch, right? The value proposition, the value that you're going to bring to this company. And there's a couple things there. One is that no matter what level you're at, you can do the exact same thing. Absolutely. So even if you're an entry level developer, engineer, product manager, designer, there's something that you want to bring to this company. Otherwise, what are you interviewing for, right? The company itself is looking for somebody to bring, at minimum, or kind of at minimum, this set of skills. I need somebody to do X, Y, and Z. But you can come in ahead of time already saying that I'm going to bring, A, B, C, and then also X, Y, and Z. Because now if you communicate that, I can say, oh, I was looking for somebody with just these skills, with just this mindset. But you came in and you showed me that you understand the business. You understand, and that's something too that like a lot of early career folks don't understand, is that, like, especially when it comes to writing code is just a part of it. There's a reason that we write code. There's a reason that we push changes. And that's because we need to provide value for who? The customer and our business, right? We need to provide value to them. Otherwise, we don't have a job. Something I learned at USA was that you don't really think about this early on. Well, I didn't. Some people do, but I didn't. I didn't think about this until I got to USA. As a software engineer, and as an engineering department, you don't necessarily, not in a lot of times, not in a direct way, you don't make the company money, right? Usually you're like you're a liability, and you cost the company money, right? And so you have to go into with that mindset. It's like, well, wait a minute, they're paying for me, they're paying for my salary, for my insurance, for my benefits, all this stuff. It adds up. So I need to be able to communicate what I'm going to bring. I'm not just going to come in here and say, oh, I'm pretty good at this, that JavaScript or C++. I'm really good at that. You have to communicate the overall value that you're going to bring. Very similar to what you just talked about. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to help us deliver solutions that are customer first, right? Customer centric, ultimately helping us to grow the business. We're going to, etc. That's something that you have to work on, and that means that you have to do it ahead of time.
Right.
You have to work on this pitch ahead of time, so when you get to the interview, you're not fumbling around and ultimately like going tangentially in different directions, and then ultimately you lose your interviewer. So that's kind of just the first part. Is everybody has an elevator pitch. Everybody has a value that they can provide. If you don't, you need to work on it, because otherwise, why do I want to hire you if you're not bringing any value?
And I would say that's true in the interview, and it's true in life. Like if I could just like big picture that, I would just say know your value. Know your value. Like don't undervalue yourself, but don't oversell yourself either. Like if you oversell yourself, you tend to mismanage expectations. And expectations management is like you mentioned, software is like this, or code is the smallest part of, or the small part of what we do. Like most of what we do is communicate, like try to figure out what the expectations are. Like 90% of the time I'm orienting. I'm trying to figure out like who expects what. And so like knowing your value is so important, not just at the interview, but throughout your career. So know your value. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a kind of a second part or a bigger part that I wanted to come back to, which is if you know the value that you're trying to bring, you kind of know your direction, right? So if I use you, Randy, your direction is you want to lead an organization, or
Mhm.
and we know we know that you're capable of leading an organization because you've done it in the past. So that's where you want to go. If you come in with that, you're going to easily from the get-go, very early, you're going to say, do our futures align? Call back to something that we talked about
Exactly.
before. Is
Exactly.
so if you have that elevator pitch, if you've already decided where you're going, and you come in and you say, hey, this is what I'm bringing, and the company says, well, we really don't need all that. We just need you to X, right? Then you can already early on say, I don't think our futures align. And if our futures align, I don't belong here. This is not the place for me.
Yep.
Something something that
Yeah.
you're going to get really early on. And even if you're an early career engineer, you can identify this. Like, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a mentor? Are you
Mhm.
looking to really help the company grow? Like, what are you looking for? You develop the elevator pitch early on, you can really start to identify that. And then if you identify that and you come in and you go through the interview, well, do your futures align, yes or no? And if not, well, honestly, like if you're early career, you're probably gonna take the job anyway because the
Right.
market's so tight and you're gonna learn what you can.
Right.
But you're gonna still know if your futures align or not. You can try to make the adjustments. And if the company's not willing to make the adjustments to help you get where you need to go, no problem. You got some experience and you move on to the next place. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's really key, is that like that future alignment. Like one of my old tech leads and mentors told me, know what you want to learn in your next job. And I think what we're really talking about here is like the interview, right? And so like knowing what you want to learn should influence that elevator pitch. But at its core, what we're really saying is like know what you want out of a job and know what you bring to that job before you even start applying. And you're right, like I mean the market's tough, and so some of this seems like, well, what I want out of a job is a paycheck, and that's okay. Just but knowing that expectation now and clearly communicating that expectation to yourself and to the people around you helps with so many things through the interview process, through the job. Like it's okay to say that. At some point it changes. We've talked about that. At some point it changes. At some point it stops being about the money and it starts being about like fulfillment and these other things.
Right. So you gave some tips. And so I like to here's a tip that has worked for me many times over,
Yeah.
continues to work for me, and I want to share it. And I've shared it with some folks, and that is control the interview. Um, I go into an interview and I want to control it. And I mean, you could say maybe it's because I'm a control freak, because I kind of am. In certain aspects, I am a control freak. I like total control over certain things. But when I go into an interview, that's my time. Like, so somebody else has set it up. But, you know, okay, so when I was early doing interviews like years ago, I'd go to an interview super nervous, hoping I could get the job, hoping that they like me. And you get more and more comfortable with things, and you also build in your confidence of like your skills, what you bring to the table, what you can do. Like today, you tell me, hey, you can't build this thing. I'm like, here, hold my beer. I'm gonna go do it, right? Because that's how I feel about, even if I don't have the skills, I know that I can get there really quickly and I can figure it out. So
Right.
early on, I go in interviews, I'm kind of nervous, this and that. And what happens is the person on the other end of the table, right? If you're sitting in a room or on the other end of the screen, they've got like these questions that laid out already that they want to ask you. And one of the worst things you can do is simply to be a passive participant in that interview
Absolutely.
process, right?
This
So
is wait, this is such that comment is such an important thing, Ram. Like you nailed it. Like don't be a passive participant in your interview. Like I love And I want you to expand on this because I actually really love your approach to like capturing an interview, and I'm really excited for you to unpack it. But like, I don't know that I've ever thought about that part of what you do until you said it just now. So
Yeah.
that's really great.
Yeah, well, because I mean, earlier on, I was a passive participant. You know, somebody would ask a question and I'd barely give an answer. You know, I'd fumble through an answer. But I learned over time, and I kind of, I'm also like a people watcher. I kind of, you know, see like, you know, behaviors, and I kind of wrote another post about this, talking about the psychology of engineers and how we grow and opinions are formed. And I got to a point to where I said, you know, I wanted to be more of an active participant. Like, this was my interview. This was my time. So
Mhm.
what if somebody else has set it up for this next hour? This is my time. And I get into it in an interview, and I will control it from the very get-go. I want to let people know that this is who I am. This is what I bring. Going back to your value proposition, this is what I am, who I am, and this is what I'm going to bring. This is what I care about. And immediately, if we kind of start to diverge, like we're not on the same page, then I know that it's not the place for me. If you're looking for somebody to come in and just to go sit in a corner and type on the keyboard, that's the wrong person, right? Because I'm going to bring to you the things that matter to me, and I want you to know it up front. So like, if we're not a culture fit, hey, I don't want to be a culture fit. I want to be a culture add, right? I want to bring the things that I care. So here's usually the way it works. You know, we start the interview and people say, "Tell me about yourself," and I'll kind of go about telling them about myself. I've gone away from the, you know, here's where I was born, here's where I went to school, here's basically, like, I hate doing the linear thing anymore. I don't do it anymore. I kind of talk about, you know, some of the projects that I'm building, the things I'm passionate about. So I don't do the linear thing anymore. Very much like a Christopher Nolan film, non-linear. And I'll kind of jump around and talk about like where I am, how I got here, the things I care about. And every now and then, so what happens is, by doing this, is now I know that, let's say we've got a 45-minute block or an hour block. Instead of letting them ask questions where they can get all their questions in, what I can do is I can focus on the questions that I know that I can talk to in great length, leaving them less time to ask the questions that I might struggle with. So this is really key. So if you're early career and you're like, I've studied DSA, I've studied like algorithms, I've studied, you know, this part of Java, when they get to that question, go in depth and show your knowledge. And then if you could always do something like this, "Oh man, I'm really sorry I went off really long. I was super excited about this." I'll do it all the time. Somebody asked me, "Hey, you know, how do you stay up to date on stuff?" I could talk forever on that.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about like the YouTube channels that I follow. I'll talk about the articles that I read. I talk about the articles that I write, the workshops that I'm doing, those podcasts. I'll talk about all these things because these are the things that help me upskill, stay up to date, right? And so I want to share those things.
Yeah.
And if I can take what would normally be like a 2-minute answer and turn it into a 10-minute answer, that's a lot less time that I have to fumble around on another question that I don't know.
Right.
So you can kind of control it. You make it very much a conversation. And sometimes I'll flip it around and ask a question right in the middle, because that's something really important, is that if anybody's doing an interview, remember, this is not one-sided. It should not be, "Hey, you ask me all the questions and I simply, you know, spit out an answer that I've prepared ahead of time." No, you ask me questions. Guess what? I might ask you a question. So if you ask me like, "Hey, how do you stay up to date?" I'm going to tell you all the things. I'm going to draw out an answer, but not drawn out in an artificial way,
Right.
in a way that says, "Hey, this is what I care about." And then I might say, "You know, what do you use to stay up to date?" Because I'm curious. I'm always looking for other
Exactly.
resources, right?
Yeah.
Becomes a conversation. You know, here we are, we're talking, we're conversing, I'm eating up all the time. But I want to like get to the real reason that all this matters, is that, and I think, you know, we both talked to folks like online and in person, and you know, people are looking for like ways to help improve their interviewing. How do they land the job? And here's what it comes down to, like, bottom line. When you're interviewing, the whole purpose is to see, do I want you on my team?
Yep.
Do I want to work with you? So in that hour, right, or 30 minutes, I have to convince you that we're going to work good together, that we're not going to clash. If we clash, I can guarantee you it's a hard no, right? I've done it before. I'm like, man, this person is real abrasive. They have too strong opinions. And I've done it before too, accidentally. Like I accidentally said, hey, I don't like using this library because this and this and this. Came across very opinionated, and then I thought about it afterwards, and I was like, oh, I'm too opinionated. This is what they're using,
Right.
and because this is what they're using, I'm not gonna get the job. So it's like whatever, right? I just moved on. And so if you don't know, we're playing this game. The game is I've got to convince you that we're going to work well on the same team together. Otherwise, you failed the game, and failing the game means you don't get a job offer, right? You
Right.
don't go on to the next round. And so, just really important. That's the whole reason you're there. That's the whole reason the interview exists.
Yeah. That's so key. And so like what I love about what you're talking about there is like the conversational nature of it, because like you know, you captured it perfectly. Like people, most interviews, I mean, at their core aren't, as much as we think they are, aren't about like, oh, is this person technically proficient? It's really, do I like the work this guy does? Do I like working with this or this gal? Right? Like, do I like working with them? And do they do good work? And so like you really have to, I mean, in everything you do, answer those two questions. But like there's all this human aspect of it that's really, really important. And that's like the conversation. Can I talk to this person? Are we going to be able to talk about, do we have similar interests? Like those things are, I mean, certainly you're not going to get hired or fired based on those things, but they're definitely going to change the tone or tenor of an interview, right? Like what you said is like, they're going to ask like, can I work with this person? And the other, like, I think at the core of also what you're saying is like, just be good at communicating. Whenever I see a resume and they have like, I'm good at communication on their resume, like I don't put much stock in that. But if you can get in an interview and carry on a conversation, like that is like key to good communication. And I think I'll just call it that, like, that's not something that, I don't know, that we tend to be great at, especially in an interview. Like interviews kind of feel pretty stiff and formal. And so if you can convert that from a stiff and formal thing to where you're passively answering questions to like a, let's just engage each other as humans, like that's a pretty strong indicator on your capability of also doing that in the day-to-day of the job, is like moving past like the bureaucratic norms and into the human norms. And like that's an important aspect of getting the job done. So yeah, I love that. And when you first like kind of told me about this idea of like capturing the interview and like just talking about the things that you're really good at, and I think this is like a great strategy. It ties very well to like knowing your value. If you know you can talk at length about keeping yourself updated on trends and technology and updating others, like spend time on that, because that's your value proposition. If they don't get to the DSA question and that's not your value proposition, they kind of have to ask themselves how much that matters to them, because you've already answered it for them how much it matters to you. What matters to you is a lot of, keeping up to date, mentoring, coaching, and developing your team.
Yeah, I love that, because sometimes I don't get to the technical question because I've eaten so much time up, and I've still gotten an offer, right? Because I
Yeah.
was able to kind of weave in some technical stuff while we're conversing to where we get to the technical part and they're like, we're out of time.
Right.
And they're okay with that, right? Because, I captured the interview, made it what I wanted it to be. And it just so happened to work for them as well, right? That
Mhm.
that they were like, oh, I want to work with this person. This person's bringing this. They're going to help mentor some younger engineers. And they didn't need to see me, code up a solution to this thing. And even if like I eat up so much time and I only have 10 minutes left on, a coding problem, which I should have had 30 minutes. What I can do is I can continue to eat up time as I walk through my solution.
Mhm.
Again, I'm never going to start coding right away. Never do that anymore. I'll be like, I'm going to write some pseudocode. I'm going to talk this out. Sometimes like I'll stub out a function. A lot of times it's like, write a function that does this. It takes this input
Mhm.
and, spits this out. I can eat up the whole time because as a seasoned engineer, you never start writing code right, or you shouldn't start writing code right away. Because remember, I don't care that I give you an answer. Like I gave you a working solution. I don't care at all. It's more about I want to show you that I know how to solve this problem,
Exactly.
and or how I problem solve.
Right.
So like the great thing is like when you teach a lot, you often like over communicate. And so and that's something that I would encourage anyone to do, is like when you're doing like these coding problems, or even if you're just at home and you're just like learning to code, talk out loud. Okay, this function needs to take these parameters, this parameters of type. And I'll tell people to do that all the time. And so every time I'm teaching, I do that. I say, you know, say it out, say what this is. I'm going to
Mhm.
create a variable that's going to store this. This is object and it does yada, yada, yada. If you talk out loud, then the interview becomes really, really easy, the technical part, because you're
Mhm.
used to communicating, you're used to talking out loud. And so I'll do that all the time. And I'll say, okay, I'm going to stub out a function. I don't really know like the meat and potatoes of it yet, but I know it needs to take this. I know I need to return this kind of data structure at the end. So I'm going to return that. It'll just be empty or null to start with, and then we'll kind of come back to it. And I can eat up so much time just discussing how I'm going to get to a solution as opposed to actually giving you a solution. Then we're at the end of this and they're like, oh, we ran out of time, but I like that you talked through it, because that's what they care about.
Right.
They
Right.
care about, do you like know how to work toward a solution? I don't really care that you give a solution. And I think one of the things that early career folks often, and even people that have been doing this for a while, but they haven't yet, turned the corner or whatever, maybe they have their approach, is that we often think about, I need to give you a solution. And that's not really it. It's, I need to communicate that I know how to get to a solution, that I know how to solve a problem, because when you're in like the tech space or whatever, it's more about breaking down problems as opposed to how quickly can we get to a solution.
Yeah.
And that's really
And
what matters.
those,
I can break it down and then I can share and I can teach. That's ultimately what a team cares about. The other thing that I think is absolutely important is to get yourself in the mindset that it doesn't matter what happened in the previous interview. The one that's right in front of you is the one that matters the most. So
yeah.
typically what happens is a recruiter calls you and you get a phone screen, right? They'll set up a phone screen and they'll say,
Right.
hey, this is like a 30-minute, maybe 15 to 30-minute phone screen. And we're just going to get to know you. So you've got to go in prepared for that. It's a little bit different than the technical that you'll have with the team later on, but you still have to go in prepared and you have to wow the recruiter. You wow the recruiter differently than you wow the team. So
Yeah.
that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, that is.
So you go in there, you talk to the recruiter, here's what I provide. But at the same time, I'm going to ask questions about the company. It's more of just kind of like a feeler.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, if you don't just screw up really badly, you're going to get the next interview. And so when they set the next interview, you have to put everything that's happened before out of your head. So if you had a great interview with a recruiter, you can't say, well, I had such a great interview with a recruiter, I know I'm going to get a job offer. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
You
Yeah.
have this great interview with the recruiter. That's not the person you're talking to next. Now you're talking to this other person. How do you convince that person that you're the right fit? Out of all these other candidates, how do you convince that person that you're the right person, to make this team better?
Yeah.
And that, like, is something that a lot of folks struggle with. I think there's something like, in our server, we're kind of talking to folks, helping, discussing interviews and things like that, especially in this market. And I think that's really key is you've got to learn to move from this problem to the next problem. Again, you're a technologist in our field specifically. That first phone screen, that's just a problem. You got to get past that. Now you get past that problem. Now you got a whole another set of problems. Now you've got this technical interview, maybe, or the team. In your case, right, you might have like 5 interviews because at the kind of like the level that you're interviewing for. And so you just move on from problem to problem and you solve them as individual problems. And if you can do that, you can succeed.